Oh my God.
The fishermen of Deadliest Catch faced their biggest nightmare on the icy waves of the Bering Sea. As they hauled up a seemingly routine crab pot, what emerged wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying. Let us uncover the truth of the Leviathan's origins, its haunting powers, and what its discovery means for the uncharted depths of our oceans and beyond. Secrets beneath the Bering Sea. The fishermen from Deadliest Catch are always chasing danger. Every trip they take out on the ocean means facing wild storms, freezing waters, and heavy, tricky gear. They're tough folks, used to pushing through tough times to bring back crab. But this time, they hauled up something that made even these hardened fishermen stop in their tracks. What they found tangled in their nets wasn't just crab, it was something no one could explain, something that would change their lives forever. It all started like any other day out on the icy waters of the Bering Sea. The crew was busy pulling in crab pots, sorting through their catch, and getting ready for the long hours ahead. The waves were gentle, well, as gentle as they get in these parts, and everything seemed routine. That is, until one pot came up holding more than just crabs. The catch? A creature straight out of a nightmare. At first glance, they thought it might be a jumbo crab, something rare but not unheard of. But no, this was different. It was wrapped in a thick, slimy coating, its spindly legs moving in a way that made everyone's skin crawl. Its eyes were huge, glowing faintly like something you'd see in a sci-fi movie. It looked alive and it looked angry. The crew, who've handled everything from freak waves to frozen ropes, suddenly didn't know what to do. Even the captain, with years of experience out here, admitted he'd never seen anything like it. After a lot of nervous chatter, they decided to keep the thing. Curiosity won out, and they locked it up in the safest container they had. But that decision would come back to haunt them. Word spread fast. Scientists got wind of the strange catch and wanted a closer look. They nicknamed it Leviathan, and everyone wanted to know what it was. Marine biologists, oceanographers, and anyone with a microscope jumped at the chance to study it. But the deeper they looked, the weirder it got. It didn't fit into any known category of sea life. Was it a crustacean, part squid, maybe a deep-sea fish? Nope, its DNA didn't match anything recorded on Earth. This was no ordinary sea creature. Some scientists thought it could be a throwback to prehistoric times, something that had stayed hidden in the darkest parts of the ocean. Others whispered about it being an alien. Whatever it was, it didn't belong to any world we know. Back on the boat, things started to get spooky. Equipment that had been working perfectly began to break down. The crew, tough as nails and not easily rattled, felt uneasy, like someone or something was watching them. A few even swore they saw the Leviathan move in its container despite the airtight seals. Sleep became a rare luxury as the creature haunted their thoughts and dreams. Then things got worse. One fisherman fell seriously ill. His symptoms were strange, nothing the ship's medic had seen before. As his condition got worse, fear spread through the crew. Some wanted to dump the creature back into the ocean and be done with it. But the captain, knowing the scientists on shore were eager to study it, refused. The Leviathan stayed aboard. As they made their way back to port, the sea turned against them. A storm rolled in out of nowhere, pounding the ship with waves as tall as buildings. The crew fought to keep the boat steady, but it felt like the ocean itself was trying to sink them. Was it the Leviathan causing this? Some of the crew started to believe it might be. Finally, the storm ended just as suddenly as it had begun. The ship limped into port, battered but still afloat. The Leviathan was handed off to the waiting scientists, who whisked it away to a high-security lab. The fishermen, relieved but shaken, were left with too many unanswered questions. In the lab, the mystery deepened. The creature's body had strange organs that didn't seem to serve any purpose. Its movements hinted at a kind of intelligence, something not usually seen in sea creatures. Theories flew fast and wild. Could it be an animal adapted to another world? Or maybe it had evolved in the deepest, darkest trenches of the ocean where no human had ever ventured. The public couldn't get enough of the story. News outlets ran wild with headlines about the Leviathan. Some people called it the discovery of the century, while others warned it might be better left alone. The crew of Deadliest Catch found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their harrowing tale told over and over again. Despite all the attention, the fishermen knew one thing: the ocean still holds secrets, and not all of them are meant to be found. They've gone back to their dangerous work, but the memory of the Leviathan lingers. Every time they pull up a pot, there's a flicker of worry. What else might be waiting down there? This bizarre encounter has reignited debates about exploring the ocean. Sure, we've got satellites in space, but there are places in the sea we still know nothing about. The Leviathan is proof of how little we understand about the world below the waves. It's a reminder of how vast, mysterious, and sometimes downright scary nature can be. As scientists keep studying the creature, the rest of us can only wait to hear what they find. Is it a freak of nature, a piece of the past, or something from another world? Whatever the answer, one thing is for sure. The ocean isn't done surprising us yet. The hours the crew spent hauling in crab pots that day seemed unending. They'd faced rough patches of ice building up on the decks, winds that cut through their gear, and the constant motion of the waves, but nothing had prepared them for what they brought up. This discovery wasn't just strange, it defied every rule and expectation they'd learned over years of working at sea. The container they secured the Leviathan in wasn't just an ordinary setup, it was reinforced and built to hold some of the strongest creatures they'd ever encountered. Yet every glance at it sent shivers through the crew. Every now and then, they caught faint noises from inside. Scraping, tapping, something shifting. The air on the ship seemed to grow heavier, a collective tension settling over everyone aboard. As the ship battled through the storm, every decision became critical. Waves slammed against the hull, drenching the decks and threatening to overturn their vessel. The crew's efforts to secure the ship against the chaos outside mirrored their struggle to keep their nerves in check. Each glance at the secured container felt like a reminder of the unknown now traveling with them. When the skies cleared, the relief was immediate, but it did little to ease the sense of unease. Stepping onto dry land, the crew handed the Leviathan off to scientists with expressions that betrayed their relief and lingering fears. This wasn't just another catch, it was something that had invaded not only their ship, but their minds as well. Inside the lab, the scientists wasted no time. They started with basic examinations, measuring the creature's limbs, analyzing its outer membrane, and running every test they could think of. The findings were as baffling as the creature itself. Its body seemed to adapt rapidly, the slimy coating on its skin shifting textures under different conditions. More unnerving, its luminescent eyes followed movements in the room, almost as though it could see through its container. Every test raised new questions without providing answers. The ocean gave them more than they bargained for this time. A haul to remember. As weeks turned into months, the mystery deepened. Scientists continued their research, publishing papers and sharing their findings with the world. Theories about the object's origin became more elaborate. Some suggested it was a fragment of a long-lost civilization, evidence of advanced technology that predates recorded history. Others speculated it was extraterrestrial, a piece of a spacecraft that had fallen to Earth and been hidden beneath the waves for centuries. Despite the excitement, there were no definitive answers. The object remained in mystery, a puzzle that refused to be solved. For the crew of the Deadliest Catch, it was a constant reminder of the ocean's secrets. They'd always known the sea was unpredictable, but this discovery had shown them just how little they truly understood. The return trips to the fishing grounds were different now. The crew worked with the same efficiency, the same determination, but there was an undercurrent of anticipation in the air. Each time they set out, they couldn't help but wonder if they'd find something else, another piece of the puzzle that was the glowing object. The ocean, as always, kept its secrets close. Fishing is a tough business, demanding physical strength, mental fortitude, and a willingness to face danger head-on. The crew knew this all too well. Their days were long, their nights often sleepless, and the cold was relentless. But they also knew the rewards, the satisfaction of a full hold, the pride of a job well done, and the knowledge that they were part of a tradition that stretched back generations.
That's pretty good. That's some big pots.
Oh my God. I'm counting it. Woo!
The glowing object had added a new layer to their lives. It was a story they'd tell for years to come, a moment that had set them apart from every other fishing crew on the Bering Sea. It was a reminder that even in a world as harsh and unforgiving as the ocean, there's still room for wonder, curiosity, and discovery. As they prepared for another season, the crew couldn't help but think about what the future might hold. The sea is vast, its depths largely unexplored. Who knows what else might be down there, waiting to be found? The glowing object was just one mystery in a world full of them, a small piece of a much larger puzzle. And for the crew of the Deadliest Catch, that was enough to keep them coming back, season after season, ready to face whatever the ocean decided to throw their way. The fishermen of the Bering Sea were no strangers to the extraordinary. Every trip out to sea came with its own dose of chaos. Crabs that wouldn't bite, waves taller than their boats, and the constant fight against the freezing wind. But this time, they brought back something that left even the hardiest of them scratching their heads. It started like any other haul. The pots were heavy, the crew was grumbling, and the crabs were plentiful. But as they emptied one particular pot, something clattered onto the deck that wasn't a crustacean. It was a chunk of metal, smooth and polished, with strange symbols etched all over its surface. Nobody knew what to make of it, but everyone knew one thing: it didn't belong there. By the time they docked back at Dutch Harbor, the story had already started spreading. The Deadliest Catch crew found something weird, people whispered at the docks. The crew was tired but restless, their minds spinning with what they'd pulled up. It wasn't treasure, not in the gold and silver sense, but it felt important. Captain Jonathan made the call to keep the object under wraps, at least for now. It was stashed away in the shipyard, covered with a tarp and guarded from curious eyes. But secrecy only added fuel to the fire. Locals, reporters, and even rival fishermen swarmed Dutch Harbor, desperate to get a glimpse. Theories ran wild. Some claimed it was part of an old shipwreck, maybe a relic from a long-lost voyage. Others said it had fallen from space, a piece of a satellite, or the more imaginative, a UFO. The symbols on the object were unlike anything anyone had seen before. They weren't letters, not in any language the experts knew. They weren't random scratches either. They looked deliberate, as if they were meant to tell a story. As the days passed, the unease among the crew grew. They couldn't shake the feeling that they'd stumbled onto something that should have stayed hidden. The object seemed almost alive, like it was watching them, waiting. Nights at the shipyard grew eerier, the strange artifact casting long, unexplainable shadows under the dim lights. One night, as a storm battered Dutch Harbor, Captain Jonathan found himself drawn back to the shipyard. Rain pelted his jacket as he pulled the tarp off the object, running his fingers over the smooth, glowing surface. The markings seemed to shift under his touch, almost like they were trying to speak to him. He stood there for what felt like hours, the howling wind around him fading into the background. The rest of the crew wasn't faring much better. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought strange dreams. Images of endless oceans, towering waves, and those same glowing symbols. They couldn't escape it, not on land, not at sea. The object had wormed its way into their minds. Experts were called in. Scientists, historians, even a self-proclaimed paranormal investigator. Each had their own theory, but none could explain the object's origin. The symbols didn't match any known language. The metal wasn't like anything found on Earth. And then there was the weight of it, far heavier than it looked, almost as if it were holding a piece of the sea itself. Theories turned from curious to outright bizarre. Was it a message from another world? A piece of technology from an ancient, advanced civilization? Or just some odd, man-made object that ended up in the wrong place? The lack of answers only deepened the mystery. Some of the crew started to regret bringing it aboard. "Maybe we should have just left it down there," one of them muttered during a rare quiet moment at the local bar. The others nodded, sipping their drinks in uneasy silence. The ocean was vast and full of secrets. Maybe this was one they weren't meant to uncover, but curiosity had a way of digging in. Despite their reservations, the crew couldn't leave it alone. They made trips to the shipyard, running their hands over the strange object, hoping for some kind of answer. Instead, they got more questions. The object started changing, its glow growing brighter, its surface warmer to the touch. It felt alive. Then one day, a stranger arrived in Dutch Harbor. He wasn't a fisherman. His clean suit and polished shoes made that clear. He introduced himself as an investigator, someone who specialized in unusual finds. Word had spread farther than they'd thought, and now outsiders were coming to see for themselves. Captain Jonathan was reluctant, but eventually agreed to show him the object. The investigator's face remained neutral as he studied it, taking notes and muttering under his breath. When he finally left, he offered no answers, only a cryptic promise to be in touch. His visit left the crew even more uneasy. What did he know that he wasn't sharing? Life seemed to return to normal, but the crew knew this was far from over. Secrets of the Bering Sea. After that, things only got stranger. People started watching the shipyard, locals, reporters, and a few faces that didn't belong to either group. The crew began to feel like they were being followed, their every move scrutinized. The object had become a magnet for attention, and not all of it was welcome. Weeks turned into months, and the crew's lives never quite returned to normal. They went back to fishing, but the object was always in the back of their minds. It was a weight, an unanswered question they couldn't shake. And deep down, they all knew one thing: whatever it wasn't finished with them. The sea had given them a mystery, and mysteries have a way of demanding answers. Whether they liked it or not, the fishermen of the Deadliest Catch were now part of a story far bigger than they'd ever imagined. Each new trip to sea felt different, weighed down by what they'd left back at Dutch Harbor. The rhythm of their work, the cranking of the winches, the sloshing of seawater on the deck felt less familiar, as if the ocean itself had shifted. They tried to focus, pulling up pots and sorting crabs, but their minds always drifted back to the object. Jonathan especially couldn't let it go. Every night he found himself returning to the shipyard, standing in the quiet darkness, staring at the strange artifact. He noticed changes, subtle shifts in the glow, new patterns emerging on its surface. It felt like the object was trying to communicate, though he couldn't begin to guess what it was saying. The crew started to notice changes in themselves too. Little things at first: a heightened awareness, sharper senses, an uncanny ability to predict the weather or the movements of the sea. Then came the dreams, vivid and unrelenting, of places they'd never seen and creatures they couldn't name. They stopped talking about it openly, afraid of what it might mean, but the tension among them was palpable. Dutch Harbor began to change as well. The town felt more crowded, more watched. Strangers appeared more frequently, some openly asking questions about the object, others lurking in the shadows. The crew's family started to notice too, asking why reporters were hanging around their homes, why men in suits were parked down the street. One evening, as Jonathan walked to the shipyard, he saw headlights in the distance. A black car idled near the fence, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. He hesitated but continued on, pulling the tarp off the object and running his hand over its surface. The glow was stronger now, pulsing faintly under his touch. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting someone to approach, but the car stayed where it was. The next day, the car was gone, but new rumors had started spreading. Some said the government was involved, that they wanted to take the object for themselves. Others claimed it was cursed, that the crew had brought something back that would doom them all. Jonathan dismissed the rumors, but the weight of them lingered. The object's changes became more pronounced. It began to emit a faint hum, barely audible but impossible to ignore. The glow grew brighter at night, casting eerie patterns on the walls of the shipyard. The crew's unease turned to fear, but they couldn't bring themselves to get rid of it. It felt like it belonged to them now, like they were meant to guard it. As the weeks stretched on, Jonathan made a decision. He called a meeting with the crew, laying everything out on the table. They needed answers, and they couldn't wait for someone else to provide them. They would take the object back out to sea, back to where they'd found it, and see if the ocean held any clues. The day they set out was clear and cold, the kind of weather that sharpened the senses. The crew worked silently, their movements purposeful. The object was secured on deck, glowing faintly under the sunlight. Jonathan stood at the helm, his eyes scanning the horizon. He didn't know what they would find, but he felt a strange sense of purpose, as if they were finally on the right path. When they reached the spot where they'd found the object, the sea was unnaturally calm. The crew lowered it over the side, watching as it disappeared into the depths. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the water began to churn, glowing faintly where the object had sunk. The crew stared, transfixed, as a column of light shot up from the ocean, illuminating the night sky. The light was blinding, and the hum they'd heard before grew louder, resonating through the boat. Jonathan felt his heart race as the symbols from the object appeared in the light, spinning and shifting, forming patterns that seemed to speak directly to him. He couldn't understand the message, but he felt it, a deep, primal connection to something far greater than himself. When the light finally faded, the sea was calm again. The object was gone, and the crew stood in stunned silence, their minds struggling to process what they'd just witnessed. Jonathan turned to his crew, seeing the same awe and fear reflected in their eyes. Whatever had just happened, it had changed them. They were no longer just fishermen, they were part of something much larger. The journey back to Dutch Harbor was quiet. The crew spoke little, each lost in their thoughts. When they docked, the town was waiting, eager for answers, but the crew had none to give. The object was gone, but its impact lingered, etched into their minds and hearts. As the weeks turned to months, the crew tried to return to normal, but the experience had left its mark. They couldn't forget the light, the symbols, the feeling of connection. The ocean was no longer just a place of work. It was a place of mystery, a reminder of how much they didn't know. Jonathan found himself returning to the spot where they'd left the object, staring out at the water and wondering what it all meant. He knew they'd been part of something extraordinary, something they might never fully understand, and though the object was gone, its presence remained, a quiet reminder of the secrets the sea still held. The fishermen of the Bering Sea had always been resilient, but now they carried with them a deeper understanding of the world's mysteries. They had faced the unknown and returned, forever changed by what they had seen. And as they continued their work, pulling crabs from the depths, they couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the ocean might reveal. It started like any other day on the frigid waters of the Bering Sea. The fishermen, rugged and worn from years of battling waves and hauling nets, weren't expecting anything out of the ordinary. They were out to catch crab, not make history. But as fate would have it, the sea had a surprise waiting for them, something that would flip their world upside down. The crew was curious, but also wary. They hauled it onto the deck, careful not to damage their equipment or themselves. The thing was smooth and cold to the touch, with faint grooves and symbols etched across its surface. It didn't look man-made, at least not by any man they'd ever known. They stood there staring, unsure of what to do next. Jonathan, the captain, decided they couldn't just leave it behind. He made the call to bring it back to the shipyard. It felt important, like they'd stumbled onto something that shouldn't be ignored. And big it was, maybe too big. They didn't know it yet, but their lives were about to take a turn they never signed up for. When they docked, the shipyard seemed eerily quiet, but it didn't stay that way for long. Soon, dark cars started showing up, parking across the street like vultures circling a carcass. Men in suits watched from a distance, pretending to be inconspicuous but failing miserably. The crew noticed, and unease settled over them like a heavy fog. It felt like they were being watched, like someone was keeping tabs on them, and not in a friendly way. Jonathan's gut told him they'd messed with something they shouldn't have. He couldn't help but wonder if they should have just left the object where they found it, deep beneath the waves. But it was too late now. The thing was out of the ocean and sitting right there, drawing attention they didn't want. The crew tried to go about their business, but the feeling of being watched never left. It was like a shadow that clung to them no matter where they went. As days passed, the strange object became harder to ignore. It wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a problem. The crew argued about what to do. Some wanted to get rid of it, to dump it back into the sea and wash their hands of the whole mess. Others felt like they had a duty to figure out what it was, to see this through to the end. After all, they'd pulled it from the deep. Wasn't it their responsibility to uncover its secrets? The days that followed were tense. The crew stuck to themselves, keeping the object hidden and avoiding unnecessary attention. Yet the sensation of being watched never went away. It gnawed at their nerves, a persistent unease that made even the bravest among them jump at shadows. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant sound outside their windows felt like a threat. The next day, a team arrived. They didn't waste any time. They loaded the object onto a truck and drove off without so much as a hint of where they were taking it. The crew watched in silence as it disappeared down the road, a mix of relief and regret washing over them. They'd been part of something extraordinary, something that would stick with them forever, but now it was out of their hands. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could get after something like that. The crew went back to fishing, back to the sea they knew so well, but the memory of the object lingered. Late at night, under the stars, they'd talk about it, wondering where it came from, what it was, and what would happen to it now. They knew they'd probably never get the answers they wanted, but they also knew they'd been part of something special. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Who decides what secrets stay hidden and who gets to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to like and subscribe for more.